So while preparing for this session, I went back to my work with Cranfield students, and as some of you may know, Cranfield is probably the only postgraduate institution in the United Kingdom, and the majority of our students are not economics or management students; they are engineers. And it's always interesting to talk to engineers in aerospace and autonomous vehicles engineering that I don't know anything about, and ask them about economy, about markets, and what their perceptions are, what it is that they think about the capitalist market-based system. And two things come across. First one is greed, that we are in an economy that is governed by greed. Each man or woman to him or herself. And the second one is that we really have a problem with equality. So that's why I then picked up these two topics, the self-interest and inequality, and tying that back into Adam Smith's work. Peter was talking about on the theory of moral sentiments predominantly. And when we look at self-interest, there is a huge amount of literature still today concerning what Adam Smith meant by self-interest. And the discourse goes from self-preservation to self-love to desire to be loved and to be liked, to some extent to greed. So it's a huge area of difficult to pin down. Is that working? Great. Okay. And then we have this concept of equality, which is a very elusive concept. And when I think about equality, I almost immediately start thinking about inequality. And equality can be achieved through reduction in inequality. That will then result into equality of opportunity, equality of outcomes, gender equality, and so on. And I want to paraphrase Martha Sen, who said that everybody wants equality of some kind, but we can't really agree what that equality is. Okay. So those are the two concepts that I want to develop with you. Now, let me just see which way is this moving. Oh, there you go. So I'm making three propositions. First one is that Adam Smith was a moral egalitarian, that he was committed to, can I move this away from here? To human equality. And the concept or the mechanism or the impartial spectator was key aspect in creating a sort of moral judgment in our affairs. Our affairs with our family, our social circle, but also in market exchanges. And the second proposition is that we need to get a fuller understanding of Adam Smith's thinking of morality. We need to combine the theory of moral sentiments with that of wealth of nations. As Petro said, is that Adam Smith revised the moral sentiments until very close to his death. Now there has been debate, goes back to 1800 in Germany, where some scholars say that there was a thus Adam Smith problem, which meant that the theory of moral sentiments was about morality, and the Wealth of Nations, he decided that morals have no ground in economic exchanges, so he changed his mind. That has been refuted, and again, both the books present a sort of different sides of the moral sentiments. And then final proposition is that Adam Smith, he always said that the nation's wealth cannot be measured by the amount of gold in the coffers of the state. But a truly wealthy nation is when those who are the poorest among us are able to have a dignified, meaningful life. So there was this egalitarian thinking in his writing. So what I have done is try to create some sort of a causal map. It's highly simplified. But my starting point is to look at the concept of self-interest. And in the theory of moral sentiments, that also runs through to some extent in the Wealth of Nations, is that we have a virtuous, constrained self-interest that is guided by the impartial observer, who creates some sort of moral code, how we make judgments of other people, and also the way we engage with people in the commercial exchanges. So therefore, that constrained self-interest increases a cooperation in commercial exchanges. So you have these sort of plus sides. In contrast, if you look at what he calls the sort of excessive unconstrained self-interest, that in fact emerges as a special interest groups from government protections. He is very critical of the mercantile order. He's very critical of politicians, clergy, academics, and merchants who are out there to exercise their self-interest to create wealth for themselves. So the plus sign that takes you to the rent-seeking behavior, that is the result of this unconstrained self-interest. And interesting enough, when these types of protections emerge in a society that creates these self-interested groups, the more prevalent it becomes, more acceptable that behavior also becomes. So that, in fact, rent-seeking behaviors can become viewed as virtuous behavior. Now, what is the consequence of that? Of course, that will crowd out cooperation in exchanges. And then on the green side there, on the causal map, that has economic consequences. It will result into economy where some very few people control the wealth, they harbor capital, interest rates may increase, and of course there is a impact on the wages as well. But if you follow the top line, where you have the virtuous constrained self-interest, the cooperation that comes from that behavior will result into an economic system that Adam Smith then talked about, that is based on a self-ownership, rule of law, competition, including some public services. So that he was not saying that we should not have a tax in the economy. In fact, taxation was, called it as an honor to pay tax as long as the taxation was not too taxing. And through that economic system, he argued that you can increase prosperity in the country, and also that way there is an increase in the material well-being of the poorest amongst us. So let me start unpacking this a bit more. So Smith endorses human equality as a normative principle. And when I read Adam Smith and David Hume, I hear a sort of wonderful Scottish accent in my head when I read it. So apologies for not being able to put a Scottish accent on. But there is in book 3 of Theory of Moral Sentiments, he talks about the impartial observer. I'm not going to read it through. But exactly he says that we need to, when we encounter somebody's opinion, we need to place ourselves in his shoes, but try to observe that opinion that we are confronted with. And we have to recognize that the opinions of the others are of equal value to our own. So he talks about equality of worth. So we as individuals, we are equal as human beings. Now, this presents a slight problem for us, because it does not, the equality of work does not necessarily mean that people are equal in virtue or intelligence, or are made equal in wealth, social status, or happiness. So if we accept that, then why should we, as individuals, respect those people and consider them worthy of our standing if we deem them to be less intelligent or virtuous than I am? And if that is the case, then if I regard everybody equally worthy, then can I tolerate the differences in the quality of life that they have? So that is a dilemma. So how does Adam Smith reconcile this issue? And when he talks about equality, he says that people are equal at least in our capacity for virtue and intelligence. And pulling a nice little paragraph from the Wealth of Nations, book 1. Again, I'm not going to read it through, but he says that the difference of natural talents in different men is much less than we are aware of. And where do these differences occur? According to Smith, it's not the way that we are born, good or bad, but there is a difference that comes from the nature of habit, custom, and education. So he says for the first 8 years in our lives, they're pretty much the same. But it's the social conditioning that begins to create the differences. And here, effect of the divisional labor. So Adam Smith, when he's talking about his economic theory, he says, well, we have the Philippine factory. We have a divisional labor. And the engine of growth in the economy is that divisional labor, because that drives efficiency, productivity, and wealth creation. But here, he says, well, in fact, the divisional labor also has some negative consequences. And that negative consequence is work of alienation. and a footnote here, Marx was a great admirer of Adam Smith on this aspect. That here's a father of free market economics, who was admired by somebody who was totally against that. So that's the sort of setting. So human beings are equal in worth in terms of their capacity to be morally virtuous. And through the mechanism of impartial spectator, we are all able to develop some sort of moral code to behave in a responsible and virtuous way. But there is issues in terms of alienation in a commercial sphere. And one of the things that Adam Smith advocated is a universal education at the sort of primary level. And that may well be because in Scotland both men and women, boys and girls, were made to attend school, and they all had an ability to write and read. He also promoted dancing on Saturdays as an organized hobby, so that these men and women who are working in the factories doing fairly menial jobs were able to get some joy over the working week. So he was concerned about the welfare of the least fortunate amongst us. So self-interest. I'm simplifying here grossly. So I do not go into the debate about what type of self-interest did Adam Smith really promote. And as a Wiener in 1927, that self-interest met to Smith not only the desire for wealth, but self-love in all its possible manifestations, including approbation, i.e. desire to be loved. So we interact with other people and we want to behave in a way that other people approve us. And he writes about a man who's making a joke, and the man finds that he's the only one who's laughing at his joke, and nobody else is joining in that laughter. And that, of course, makes you feel uncomfortable. So the positive effects of the self-interest, the virtuous self-interest. Stigler in 1982, I think it was the American Association keynote, when he was talking about the wealth of nations, and he says that the wealth of nations is alive and well at the University of Chicago. So the wealth of nations is a stupendous place erected upon the granite of self-interest. Now, a nice sentence that I like hearing from the Wealth of Nations is, give me that which I want, and you shall have this which you want. Here's the mutuality. So we are engaging in collaboration, cooperation, and trading. And all that is fine and good when we have this self-interest that is moderated or is based on a virtuous self-interest. But what happens if the self-interest is out of control? Students, you may remember the film Wall Street with Michael Douglas and Charlie Sheen. And Michael Douglas, who was this mega asset streamer, he says, rise up, Sonny, Sonny, money doesn't sleep, and greed is good. Now, we could see in that film a greed in its form. And of course, he may engage on that about the Mandeville and Adam Smith, about the role of greed in delivering common good. So what happens if the self-interest is out of control? So Smith, as I said before, he criticizes the manufacturers and to some extent as well this abuse of self-interest by professors and priests and politicians without any doubt. But the interesting thing about reading the theory of moral sentiments and the wealth of nations is that in the theory of moral sentiments, the critique is more hypothetical. There's this wonderful passage about an ambitious poor man's son. And what Smith says is that, if I'm poor, that is a motivating factor. Okay? I want to improve myself. I have a self-interest to gain more. Okay? So I will work hard. That's all good. Okay? But the problem is that when we are looking at the wealthy who like to drive around in their gilded carriages, according to Smith, they actually take more pleasure for being admired by the poor than the actual physical ownership of that carriage. And then this poor man's son keeps working, achieving great wealth, but in the end realizes that, in fact, all that labor that went into achieving that wealth excluded him from enjoying life, other aspects of life. So, what Smith is arguing is that the excessive self-interest damages both the individual morally and also the society. And he was a pretty concerned about how do we then rein in this excessive self-interest. And the paragraph in the bottom, on the Wealth of Nations 4, is that try to do that through some sort of government intervention is not going to be productive, is not going to work. And I'll read this. To expect, indeed, that freedom of trade should ever entirely be restored in Great Britain is as absurd as to expect that in Oceania or Utopia, the private interests of many individuals irresistibly opposed to it. The member of parliament who supports every proposal for strengthening this monopoly is sure to acquire not only the reputation of understanding trade, but great popularity and influence. In colloquial terms, it is there that we are able to influence political decision makers and create policies that will allow us to have some sort of monopoly position or engage in rent-seeking activities. So here's a dilemma. Okay. We have the enlightened self-interest, we have excessive self-interest. Then what is the answer? Well, there's legislation. And Smith says, well, that's not going to work. So what does he do? He articulates an economy that has only three very basic laws of justice that we should have in our economy or in our society. And he says, well, there are three laws of justice in the theory of moral sentiments, the laws which guard the life and person of our neighbor. The next are those which guard his property and possessions. And the next are those which guard what are called personal rights, or what is due to him from promises of others. So what is he effectively saying here? He's saying that we need to allow people the moral agency and the economic agency to make decisions for ourselves. And the problem is that when we have to operate under some sort of feudal law or some institutional frameworks in a society that safeguard the special interest groups or create those special interest groups, we can't have that. What we need to do is to allow the individual agency and responsibility for his own actions. And that is the basis of a economy that will hopefully deal with the issues of equality and inequality. So the question then arises is that, was Adam Smith talking about some sort of distributive justice? And the answer is no. He addressed inequality indirectly through the creation of a free society where the individual economic decision making is concentrated at the lowest possible level in economic activity. And he then, there's a very interesting discussion on when he talks about the free trade in the Wealth of Nations Book 1. And he compares Holland to England. And he said that in Holland, the firms actually operate at a lower profits than elsewhere in Europe. So in order to achieve that, we need to have a competitive economy, remove special interest groups, or remove those types of institutions that allow special interest groups to emerge. Because in Holland, when the interest rates are low, that means that there's a capital availability. There's a significant level of competition that drives down the interest. At the same time, this will result into increase in wages. And he talked about France, that in France the interest rates are high, and in order for the companies to be able to compensate for the high interest rate environment is to drive down wages. So he talked about or recommended a structurally sound competitive economy with a divisional labor. Remember, the efficiency is there, with the caveat of understanding that the divisional labor will create worker alienation, and we need to have corrective mechanisms to deal with that. Freeing capital for investment. He was highly critical of land being parked into non-productive uses. He talked about the Americas, where the land was abundant, and hence there was a significant economic activity coming from that. And then the natural determination of the interest rates, where you have a abundant capital availability, lower prices, increases in wages, and the overall prosperity. So that is that's the highly simplified logic with Adam Smith, looking at the equality and the self-interest. And let me just leave you with a couple quotations, not only from Adam Smith, but that I think are quite pertinent for our discussion here today. So the first one actually is from Adam Smith. He said, no society can surely be flourishing and happy, of which the far greater part of members is poor and miserable. And the second one comes from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs from his IEA 1998 Hayek Memorial Lecture. And I think that actually tallies quite nicely with what Adam Smith was talking about the constrained self-interest and the moral code. And he said that without a shared moral code, there can be no freedom in our society. I believe we have lost our traditional sense of morality. When it comes to personal behavior, we now have come to believe that there is no right or wrong. Instead, there are choices. Either we recover the moral sense, or we'll find too late that in the name of liberty, we have lost our freedom. I think that sums up quite nicely. And the final word I leave to the son of one of the sons of the three founding fathers of Lehman Brothers, that spectacularly then failed in 2008, by Herbert Lehman, back in the beginning of the 20th century. He says, grabbing and greed can go on for just so long, but breaking point is about to come sometime.